On a hot summer day, the streets of Atlanta were filled with scorching heat. Under the intense sun that had been shining since morning, 75-year-old grandmother Helen Parker was walking aimlessly. She was a wealthy person who owned half of the commercial district of Atlanta. She couldn't even find her home. Sweat was pouring down like rain and her breath was running out, but grandmother Helen Parker didn't know where to go. She couldn't even remember where her home was or why she was there. Her memories of the past, when she and her husband raised children and brought up Atlanta's downtown one by one, had already faded away. People passing by looked at grandmother Helen Parker with strange eyes. It was because of her clothes stained with dirt and her hair. Still, grandmother Helen Parker continued walking without even noticing those gazes. As she walked under the bridge, she began to feel thirsty. She wanted to drink at least a sip of water, but she didn't have a single coin in her pocket. At that time, a familiar building came into view from afar. In my dim memory, the thought that it was a bank crossed my mind. As I walked into the bank, the cool air conditioning blew across my face. I thought I would come to my senses for a moment, but the people inside the bank frowned as soon as they saw Grandma Helen Parker. Some people avoided the place out of fear, and others pointed at me. Grandma Helen Parker mustered up her courage and approached the window. She asked in a trembling voice, "Can you give me a glass of water?" Somehow, this place seemed familiar, but the young bank clerk's response was cold. The voice was filled with disgust. "This is not that kind of place. Please go out." Grandma Helen Parker continued her plea once more. "Wait a minute, I remember something," but before she could finish speaking, the bank clerk called the security guard. "Security guard, please let that old lady out. The other customers are uncomfortable." The security guard soon came and grabbed Grandma Helen Parker's arm. "Grandma, you have to go out. Don't come back again." That's how Grandma Helen Parker was dragged out of the bank. Grandma Helen Parker, who had been shining at the threshold of the bank, ended up falling on her butt. At that moment, her mind flashed and she recalled that she had deposited a huge sum of money, $13 billion, in this bank. Big tears welled up in Grandma Helen's eyes. Her pride had already fallen to the ground, and something deep inside her felt like it was crumbling. Grandma Helen Parker stood on the sidewalk in front of the bank for a long time. She sat there, unable to move. What hurt more than the pain in her but was her heart. She never imagined that she would be treated like this at the bank where she had done business her whole life. People passing by still looked at Grandma Helen Parker with strange eyes. But now, she could feel those gazes. Because she came to her senses, she realized how shabby she had looked when she went to the bank. "There's $13 billion in deposited money here," Grandma Helen Parker muttered in a small voice. In the meantime, she had been with her husband in Atlanta. It was a fortune she had accumulated by buying buildings in the city center one by one, and a precious legacy she would pass on to her children. But she had never seen such treatment at the bank where she had entrusted the money. She could see the bank employees through the glass doors of the bank. The young employee who had kicked her out earlier was still smiling brightly while serving customers. Seeing that made her heart ache even more. Grandma Helen's eyes turned red. 10 years ago, the employees of this bank would have bowed their backs when they saw her. She thought that if her husband were alive, this wouldn't have happened. She slowly got up from her seat, stroking the hem of her sweaty clothes. Her legs were shaking, but she couldn't turn back like this. Grandma Helen Parker headed straight home. It was the way to her luxurious house located in the center of Atlanta with a clear mind. As she walked along Peachtree Street, Grandma Helen Parker looked at the buildings she owned one by one. Usually, the signs that were only seen dimly, and even the expressions of the merchants lowering their rents, came into focus. It was thanks to the temporary remission of dementia. Grandma Helen Parker hurried her steps. The first thing she had to do when she got home was to contact her legal representative. She couldn't leave what happened today as it was. After walking for an hour, she finally arrived home. Grandma Helen Parker immediately picked up the phone. "Hello, lawyer." She called with a trembling voice to tell him what happened at the bank today. The lawyer listened to Grandma Helen Parker's story seriously. "I heard something like that happened. It must have been so frustrating. Let's go together." After hearing the lawyer's words, Grandma Helen Parker let out a sigh of relief and hung up the phone. Grandma Helen Parker opened the closet door for the first time in a long time. She picked the neatest dress and started ironing it. "Tomorrow will be different. I won't be ignored anymore. Tomorrow, I'll show you who I am." Grandma Helen Parker's eyes changed. "I won't be ignored as a dementia patient, but I'll assert my rights as a proud building owner and depositor." While ironing the dress, she decided to talk about what she had to say tomorrow. From early morning, Grandma Helen Parker's house was filled with a busy atmosphere. She sat in front of the dressing table for a long time, unlike usual. She combed her hair neatly and applied a light layer of powder to her face. She also put on the dress that she had ironed late last night. "Today will be different," she muttered while looking at herself in the mirror. The way she looked yesterday is gone. Instead, the figure of a dignified woman who owned half of the Atlanta commercial district was reflected in the mirror. At the appointed time, the lawyer arrived. "Grandma, you have waited long. I will be with you until the end today." To the lawyer's words, Grandma Helen Parker nodded her head. In the car, looking at the bank with firm eyes different from yesterday, the lawyer carefully asked, "Grandma, is there anyone who would like to withdraw the full amount? Isn't it going to be left behind?" When we arrived in front of the bank, memories of yesterday came to mind. But today's Grandma Helen Parker was different. She walked into the bank with confident steps wearing a luxurious dress. The person who had kicked her out yesterday saw her and immediately headed to the warehouse. "Do you remember me from yesterday?" Grandma Helen Parker's voice was firm. Yesterday, the bank clerk looked like he didn't know English. "I'm sorry, but before the bank clerk could even finish his words, a lawyer came out. This is the same person who asked Grandma Helen Parker, who owned half of Peachtree Street, for a glass of water yesterday." The bank clerk's face turned pale at the lawyer's words. The branch manager came running out. "Mrs. Parker, I'm really sorry for what happened yesterday," but Mrs. Parker waved her hand. "The apology is done. I want to cancel all my accounts." The branch manager's face turned pale. "Mrs. Parker, I sincerely apologize. What should we do?" But Mrs. Parker's decision was firm. "Don't say anything more. I'll cancel all my deposits and rent accounts." It took a long time to confirm. The deposits were so large that it took a long time. The entire $13 billion and the rent accounts. "Is it right to cancel all 13? The employee asked in a trembling voice. "Yes, that's right." Grandma Helen Parker's answer was firm, and she kept trying to dissuade him while she was sweating, but it was no use. The paperwork continued all morning. Grandma Helen Parker's steps as she withdrew all the money were light. The humiliation from yesterday no longer weighed heavily on her heart. Instead, confidence took its place. "Which bank will you go to next time?" the lawyer asked. "I haven't decided yet, but I will choose carefully this time." Grandma Helen Parker's words contained a firm will. After Grandma Helen Parker withdrew all the deposits and left, the bank fell into great confusion. The branch manager called an emergency meeting. Who was the employee who kicked out the elderly person? The employees gathered in the conference room bowed their heads and couldn't say anything. The young female employee opened her mouth in a trembling voice. "I'm sorry. I did it." The branch manager's sigh filled the conference room. "Did you know that 40% of our branches' total deposits were Mrs. Parker's money?" The air in the conference room froze at the branch manager's words. In addition, the rent for the Peachtree commercial area alone was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. All of those business partners were lost at once. The faces of the employees turned pale one by one. "I will somehow visit you in person and apologize," the young employee stood up and said, but the branch manager shook his head. It was already too late. Mrs. Parker's pride had already been hurt, and her trust in our bank had also been ruined. The rumor quickly spread. Other bank managers in Atlanta City contacted her one by one. Mrs. Parker really withdrew all her money. The branch manager answered the phone with a heavy heart. Meanwhile, stories began to circulate among the Peachtree merchants. Mrs. Parker had put all her rent accounts in the basement. The bank employees had been bowing to her all this time. Now, I wonder which bank she actually went to. The audit team came down from the head office in a hurry. How could this happen? Our bank's top depositor was lost like this. The branch manager silently accepted the barrage of criticism. The young employee was eventually called to the personnel department. It was a big mistake to judge a customer based on their appearance. Do you know how much damage the bank suffered because of your mistake? The personnel manager's sharp criticism followed. Other banks in Peachtree Street began working behind the scenes to attract Grandma Helen Parker's account. "If you choose our bank, we will provide you with the highest level of preferential interest rates." However, Grandma Helen Parker did not open her heart easily. "I don't need kindness for money. I'm looking for a place that treats people with sincerity." The branch managers were speechless at Grandma Helen's words. Meanwhile, in Peachtree Street, the merchants voluntarily began to stop doing business with the bank. "If a bank ignores our elders like that, we have no reason to do business with it." Within a month, dozens of store accounts were transferred to other banks. The bank's head office was struggling to come up with countermeasures. "We will completely revise the customer service manual. We will strengthen employee training." But the interior had already collapsed, and the bank's status in Peachtree Street had fallen to rock bottom. When the autumn wind began to blow, Grandma Helen Parker finally decided on a new jewel bank. It was a small, but local bank that had been watching over Peachtree Street for a long time. Grandma Helen Parker smiled warmly at the branch manager's greeting. Since that day, a new lesson has taken root in the banking industry. You should never judge a person by their appearance. And there is deep reflection on what true customer service is. The lesson that Grandma Helen Parker left behind was recalled for a long time. It caused a big stir in the Atlanta financial world. All banks have customers. We created a new response manual and included this case as a mandatory part of new employee training. Today, we will learn through this case what kind of results can result from judging people based on their appearance. The bank in the new residence has prepared a special space for Grandma Helen Parker. It is a dedicated rest area where she can rest comfortably at any time. We will now take care of her like family. Grandma Helen Parker smiled happily at the sincere consideration. The merchants in Peachtree Street treated Grandma Helen Parker especially. "Grandma, are you having a hard time today? The weather is getting cold, so please have a cup of warm tea before you go." Their sincere heart was conveyed. Sometimes, when symptoms of dementia came, the merchants volunteered to take care of Grandma Helen Parker. "The elderly person's house is over here. I will take you there. Don't worry. We are here. They looked after each other as if they were a family. In the past, the bank employees were still spending time regretting and reflecting. If only we had paid a little more attention then. I now realize that the value of a person lies in their heart, not their appearance. Grandma Helen Parker decided to use her wealth more meaningfully. She donated a large amount of money to a welfare facility for dementia patients. I wish there were no more people struggling like me. Her good deed created another emotion. The media in Atlanta also covered this story. There were many articles with titles such as, "Judging a person by their appearance is the true meaning of customer service." Many people learned a deep lesson from this story. We must not forget that it is not the size of the money, but the heart of a person that is important. This one word from Grandma Helen Parker had a big impact on the financial world. All banks began to emphasize services that serve with the heart. Now, all banks in Atlanta have a new slogan. All customers are our family. It was not a formal slogan, but a sincere promise. The lesson Grandma Helen Parker left behind has become this new: she made a change. Even though she suffered from dementia, Grandma Helen Parker's pride and dignity remained the same. The path she walked gave many people a deep impression and lesson. It was a valuable lesson that we should treat people with our hearts, not their appearances.